And when I say that, I don't mean that there are no concepts of hell in the Bible. What I mean is that there's no single, unified, or consistent concept of hell that could be labeled the biblical concept of hell. The Hebrew Bible has no concept of hell, at least not until the very last passages that were composed during the Greco-Roman period. There's a passage in Daniel. The very last passage of Isaiah seemed to be pointing in the direction of this developing notion of post-mortem divine punishment. But prior to the Greco-Roman period, the Hebrew Bible has no concept of post-mortem divine reward or punishment. The afterlife is just Sheol, which is the murky existence that is reserved for everyone. Everybody goes to the same place. Nobody gets a reward or a punishment. They just continue to exist in this murky afterlife that is only improved by the consistent provision of food and drink and invocations of your name and things like that. A concept of post-mortem divine punishment really only begins to develop as a response to the violent oppression of the Judean and the Judahite people during the Babylonian, the Persian, and the Greco-Roman periods. As people are starting to wonder, where is God's divine reward and punishment in life, and they're not seeing it, and they're seeing their own people being slaughtered without seeing any divine justice, they're imagining, well, it must be in the afterlife where these things are meted out. And with the help of Greek mythology, we begin to see concepts of divine reward and punishment developing, particularly in the Enochic literature and in other Greco-Roman period Jewish literature that is being composed. And so by the time of the New Testament, you have three vague ideas of post-mortem divine punishment. There's a concept of annihilationism, where the punishment consists in just ceasing to exist. There's a concept of temporary conscious torment, followed either by salvation or annihilation. And then there is the concept of eternal conscious torment. And scholars have pointed out you can identify all three of these in different parts of the New Testament. And then there are other parts of the New Testament that don't seem to have any concept of it at all. For instance, Paul never uses any word that can plausibly be translated hell. And while he seems to be referring to annihilationism in one part of Thessalonians, in one part of Corinthians, he suggests that someone who is committing grave sexual sin be turned over to Satan in order that the spirit might be saved in the day of the Lord. And a lot of scholars interpret that as a kind of universalism, where this individual is going to be tormented by Satan for a time, but ultimately be saved. And you had a lot of early Christians who endorsed a notion of universalism, that whether or not they're going to be punished in the afterlife, ultimately the end goal of every human is the kingdom of God. And scholars still debate the degree to which these different ideologies are popping up in different parts of the New Testament and in the writings of early Christians. But there's not really a single unified or consistent concept of hell that is found throughout the Bible. There are just different ideas about what happens in the afterlife. For some folks, it's just the same dreary existence. For other folks, there's some concept of reward or punishment, but those concepts differ. And I think it's not until we get the rise of a centralized hierarchy and a church institution backed by imperial power that we begin to get a systematization of these things that results in an agreement about a single concept of hell as eternal conscious torment. And that's primarily because of how rhetorically powerful that concept is. And then when we get into the medieval period, we have a lot of Christian literature from different parts of Europe that kind of give flesh to this skeleton. And so when we think of hell today, we're looking back through centuries of interpretive lenses and traditions, and that's what we're seeing, because there is no biblical concept of hell. Most of the Bible has no such concept whatsoever, and the parts of the Bible that do have some concepts of hell are inconsistent, and it's up to us to negotiate with that inconsistency to try to impose a sense of unity upon it.